Hey lads, today we're going to talk about the French-Canadian Revolution, starting with the cards. You have your 2 Ironclads card, pretty standard, you know what that does. You have your Infinite Fort card, you probably already know what that does. Then after that, you have your infamous 7 Grizzlies meme card. After that, you have the 14 Highlanders, very useful, especially with the Mercenary Loyalty card if you send that beforehand. Then you have your Infinite 15 Elk, so if you have Furriers, then that will be extra useful. You have your Infinite 10 Villager card, and then you have your Native American Allies card, which as Canada will give you access to 4 pretty useful Native American allies, which we'll go over in more detail later. And then, last but not least, you have your team, 10 Buffalo, which will really help your teammates that like their hunt. To take full advantage of the French-Canadian Revolution, you need to send 3 cards before you revolt. You need to send the Northwest Passage, you need to send Pioneers, and you need to send Wilderness Warfare. Also, make sure that you research Blunderbuss and make sure that you research Greatcoat. Now that's what you need. What I also recommend is that you send the Stonemasons card, and that when the game starts, after you revolt, you disable Enable Easy Drag Military. This will let you select both civilians and also military units with the same drag, which will be important for this strategy. The French Courrier de Bois is already infamously hard to kill. When you combine that with the right cards and the Canadian Revolution, which gives them more range and more attack, they end up with a stat line that is about as good as the French Age 4 Skirm. Now this means that you have a unit that's almost as strong as a Skirm, that can gather, that can build all of the normal buildings. They're sort of like a Karelian Jaeger that trades some offensive potential for more of an ability to gather and more of an ability to build buildings. And if you combine them with the Stonemasons card, then that means that you can pump out buildings right in front of your opponent's base insanely fast. You want towers, you want walls, you want a barracks, you want an artillery foundry, you want a stable. It's right there. You can do it almost straight away, just like that. And if you deselect the option that only lets you select military units and not civilian units with the same drag, then that means that you can move up your Courrier de Bois with your military units easily and basically treat them as combat engineers, moving up, building buildings, and just being a terror to your opponent. And that isn't all that the French-Canadian Revolution has up its sleeve. You also have your various natives. You have, of course, the Cree Courrier de Bois, which you get from your Cree ally through the Canadian Revolution Native American Allies card. You also have your more combat-related Native American units, such as your Cree Tracker, which is a Skirmisher type unit, and you also get another Skirmisher type unit in the Cherokee Rifleman, which has slightly different properties. You also have your Huron Mountlet, which is good for siege, and you have the Noob Clubman. You probably know what the Noob Clubman does. Also, if you combine all of your Native American allies with your already strong French units and some grizzly bears for the memes, you can take out your opponents pretty easily. That said, we should probably go over each individual native unit that you get through the Native American Embassy as the French, so that we can break down their strengths and weaknesses. Now, the Cree Tracker, vis-a-vis the Cherokee Rifleman, they have a bit more range, the same range as the Gurkha, but they have less of an attack compared to the Cherokee Rifleman. The Cherokee Rifleman does 13 damage, the Cree Tracker only does 10, which subject to bonuses, but they get that 2 extra range, and when you fully buff either of these units, it's going to add even more skirmishers to the French Canadians, which will give you even more killing potential on the battlefield. And as I mentioned before, the Cherokee Riflemen, they have more damage than the Cree Tracker, at the cost of having a bit less range. They also have less hit points than the Cree Tracker, unfortunately, and both the Cree Tracker and also the Cherokee Riflemen only have 10 range resist. So against range units, they don't stack up as well as they probably should, despite having all that health. However, that health does let them take down cavalry if they're in large groups, because they're a bit chunkier. They don't just fall apart the first time that a hussar hits them, so they have their uses, definitely. Another important unit, of course, is the Noob Clubman, which has that infamously high siege attack. These boys can take down walls no problem when they're in a big enough group. Not so good against enemy units, decent against cavalry, but I mainly recommend that you use them against buildings. And in a similar vein, you have the Huron Mantlet, which is a unit with a high range resist and great damage against buildings, so they can tank tower fire pretty well, or if there are a couple of skirms hiding inside some houses or behind a bank, they can deal with those decently well, and then move on to taking out buildings. So if you're going up against a Dutch player who likes to hide behind their cute little walls, then this might be a good unit to pull out. It's just one example of the various tools that the Canadian Revolution gives you as the French. I cannot recommend this revolution enough. It gives you combat engineers and plenty of useful native allies. At the end of the day, the French-Canadian Revolution gives you native units with high siege attack. It gives you skirmisher-style native units, which costs no population, so that's extra skirmishers on top of what you already have. And it gives you villagers that can fight like skirmishers, while also having the ability to construct buildings at will. It's an excellent revolution, and it's not just for the memes. Have fun representing the Great White North. Oh, Canada, our home and